But Gary Foley and a range of other comrades who've not taken an ounce of their bloody scrap metal off the table have never succumbed to the invitation to sit around and be part of the compromise and part of the oppression. And so it's a great privilege to be able to be here today and to say to people who recognise in the spirit of Eureka is the spirit of revolutionary activity throughout time since whitefella came to this country. And it's an important moment to recognise, but it's also an important moment to recognise that it's not just an Australian symbol, but today we see in two places something a bit bigger than the embryo that the Arab Spring or the Occupy movement represented. And so we see in Thailand the people's struggle today calling for councils of action to replace the government. No faith in the elected democratic bullshit that they've been forced to go through. A People's Council, they say, will replace us as proper representatives. And of course, in Eastern Europe, we're seeing a very confused, but nevertheless again, powerful demonstration of people who refuse to accept the leadership that's currently proffered to them. And whilst we've all been inspired by both Occupy and the Arab Spring, it would be foolish to see in them something other than embryos of what is possible. And to those of us who've shared that struggle and walked that path, we can take great inspiration from it. But we also have to learn the lessons of it. Because imperialism is not just going to go away because a number of us appear in the streets. In the last 4 years, the only people who've done well out of the so-called financial crisis, which now imposes austerity on the rest of the world, are the 0.01% of the world's population whose net wealth increased by 47% in that same time period where we've suffered. Enough is enough. It's time for a collected activity of all of us who are engaged in resistance in some form or other to learn how to collaborate together, to end our isolation, to end our particulars, and to become part of that universal movement that says enough is enough is enough. It's time. It's rotten overripe time in which we made some fundamental changes. When the working class in America is disappearing, when the average wages in America today are lower than they were in 1968, we have to ask some fundamental questions about the nature of our representatives. And for most of us it will be clear that the treachery and betrayal that exists within the formalised forms of the working class movement don't hold out any solutions for us. So that Labor Party that used to be owned by the working class, it was created out of struggle such as this, is no longer a party of the working class and hasn't been for a long time. The trade union movement, meant to represent the interests of the working class, have sold out so long ago it's hard to remember when they sold out. And yet all of us on the left remain in our own little cocoons, unable to talk to each other, unable to collaborate with each other. Well, we have to find a way to overcome that problem, folks, because our particular concerns are nowhere near as serious as those that exist on a worldwide scale. And it is a choice between life and death. Whether you're an environmentalist and provoked by concerns for the future of the environment, whether you're a social democrat and concerned about social justice, whether you support the Indigenous struggles, none of those struggles will be resolved outside the fight to transform the entire world. And so we need to find our allies and we need to articulate a new way of doing business, because the old ways have led us to where we are: isolation, despair and defeat. And for those of us who contain a revolutionary spirit, such as was demonstrated 159 years ago, it's urgent that we find those ways to talk, to communicate, to share our aspiration, which is after all a very common one and a very simple one. We know that for 1% of what the world's financial institutions spend each year on themselves, creating their phony money games, their monopoly games, pursuing things that don't exist, creating commodities that have no value, no meaning. And yet, when Obama spent all that money rescuing the banks in 2008, for 10% of what he spent, he could have bought every house in America that was currently under mortgage. He could have paid for a house for every person who didn't have a house. And I'm not a Keynesian economist, but I can think what would happen to household expenditure under circumstances where you no longer had a mortgage. They would have gone out and bought flat screen TVs and second cars, and the economy would have recovered instantaneously. And instead we remain in a quagmire 5 years later because they've spent that money and they continue to print it at the rate of $85 billion a month in order to sustain not the economy but the share market. And so it's a time for another 1% club to come into existence. Those of us who agree on a perspective should put aside the things that have separated us in the past because they really are petty, immaterial features. And we should work our way through a new language that says there is a way for us to unite and there is a way for us to see this worldwide struggle as a worldwide struggle and for us to play our part in the winning of it. So thank you very much for the opportunity to be here this morning, folks.
Well, that's what you call an old-fashioned fire brand.